And it's time for the rest, actually the real story, the rest of the story, like Paul Harvey used to say. And in this particular one, I'm going to start a series called The Impossible Mathematics of Atheistic Materialism and Evolution. And in this particular one, we're going to cover the subject of just DNA. You'll see in this particular video kind of a list of things that we'll cover. And Lee Cronin is an origin of life scientist, and in the video you're going to see him and Carl Sagan, and we're going to talk about the first life and DNA. So without further ado, let's watch the video clip.
4.4 billion years ago. It's too hot on Earth for liquid water to exist. But there's water vapor, steam in the atmosphere. The trick is how to get it out of the sky onto any world where you hope to have life. A little rain must fall. For millions of years, as the planet cools, rain pours down, forming puddles, lakes, and eventually our oceans. By 3.8 billion years ago, our planet has a moon and permanent oceans. $3.8 billion years ago, beneath the surface of our primeval oceans, a revolution is taking place. 6 simple elements, including hydrogen from the Big Bang, and oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen created by stars, have combined to form the key substances that will make up all life, including us. The most spectacular is DNA. Within its spirals hide the secret codes of life. 700,000 years after the planet first formed, life on Earth begins. We stand not on the shoulders of giants, but of tiny organisms, bacteria.
Within a few hundred million years, there's evidence in the fossil record that life formed simple cellular life. Those two facts are not, as far as I know, disputed by
those are not contestable. How we got from the point A to point B?
Absolutely, but I did not say we knew.
Right. So we're agreeing. Okay. You and I agree, Lee, that how we got from the simple molecules to life, it happened, but we don't know how.
Exactly.
In this ooze emerged the first life.
I find it problematic in that there's an extrapolation from a very small experiment in a laboratory.
Researchers have now created life from non-living parts.
There were many kinds of molecules in the primordial soup.
I'm boiling up some primordial soup.
Your entire civilization. It all begins right here in this little pond of goo.
You see, when I pushed him and pushed him and pushed him, we don't know how. Absolutely. Shortly after the heavy bombardment, shortly after the cooling of the Earth, boom, there's life. That's all we know.
So what are the requirements for our living system? We need genetic code, we need mating, we need metabolism, we need adaptation, we need homeostasis. And we can build a system, and I can show you a flow chart. It's the most basic unit of matter that can undergo Darwinian evolution that you know of. And I suppose it won't be much of a surprise to see that it's a cell.
We see here the set of instructions in human DNA, written in a language billions of years older than any human tongue.
Okay, so that's the video. Now, I like it because, listen, that's their creation story, and they're sticking to it. I like that. it's interesting to me. So I'll get into it more later why that's a good thing for us. So shortly after what they call the period of the late bombardment of the Earth, there was no life that could survive. And that's when, right after that, life begins. All right, so Lee Cronin, the smallest form of life is a cell. And I didn't show that part to you, but in that same video that I used that small DNA clip from. I have a larger clip of it. Carl Sagan talks about, again, what minimal life was. And he reiterates the fact, just like Lee Cronin did, that it had to be a one-celled creature. Now, again, I've recently heard that it was a virus, but a virus needs a host, as Carl Sagan points out. And then even the Science Channel, their illustration for the simple life was a bacteria. So they're all in agreement as to what constitutes minimal life. Now, from the portion of the video where the Science Channel was talking, or at least it's a show from the Science Channel, they throw in the word simple. What do you mean they throw in the word simple? Well, you got to hear the word simple. I can't tell you how many times now when I do research on anything that the evolutionists put out, especially today, they always have to throw in the word relatively simple. Relatively this. They give you the impression that, we're on the verge of making life. In fact, as you notice, somebody from the media in that video clip, they made life in the lab. And they never have. Well, it's made up of 6 simple elements, but you have to ask yourself why they're always throwing in that word. Well, it gives the masses the wrong impression. So by any means necessary, you got to give the audience what they want. They want to make sure that what they're being taught, that life is simple, and they can, they don't need any kind of agency to get this thing done. They have to get that word simple in your brain first. But then what did they do? The Science Channel video. They throw in the DNA molecule with no explanation of how it got there. So, now I have a setup question for the scientific community, but it's an actual honest question, and it's really the point of this whole video. So Lee Cronin in the video tells us what is minimally needed for this first cell. So in the video, I'm going to only cover one of the listed attributes in his list. And that at this time, we're going to talk about the genetic code DNA needed for first life. And also, let me reiterate, from the origin of life scientist Lee Cronin, and the clip I'm talking about is when he's talking about the fossil record. And he says there's, 2 undisputable facts, etc., that life appeared basically right after 3.8 billion years ago, right after the late bombardment. And during the late bombardment, of course, because of what it was like, there was no biological life could survive. So I hate to say this, if you missed it, this admission, and it's still, again, I'm glad that he did this because it sets him up. This admission creates an unanswerable question for the atheist, the materialist, the evolutionist. And the very last clip I added to the video by Carl Sagan sets up a conundrum. DNA, according to Carl Sagan, is a language billions of years older than any human tongue. Really? Well, who wrote it? When the Science Channel slipped in the DNA for the first cell, what I wanted to do, if I couldn't, of course, raise my hand and say, wait a minute. Wait a minute. You talked about 6 simple elements, but you didn't explain anything about where the DNA comes from. I saw a gentleman, I'm not even going to say his name, but he showed a little video clip of sun, affecting a DNA molecule, and poof, that's how life got here. Sunburn's responsible for life. What nonsense. So, if no biological life could survive during the late bombardment, excuse me, where is the evolutionary time for the first 400 million lines of DNA for the first cell so that it could do what? Replicate. And we're not going to talk about the replication system right now. I'm just talking about the DNA needed to build it. Now, you ask me, well, why is it 400 million lines of code? Well, if you got to, go back in the video and look at Lee Cronin's list. It's his list of the binary machinery that you need. And don't kid yourself, it's highly complex. And when I say highly complex, like I said here in my video, that doesn't express it. It's astronomical sophistication. Astronomical. Just because it's, in fact, because it is microscopic and astronomical, adds to the complexity, doesn't take away from it. The amount of genetic code to build the necessary machinery, it's beyond your comprehension. And fact, I'm probably giving up or conceding a few 100 million lines of code. But hey, for the sake of argument, even if the amount is, say, half or a quarter of what I wrote, 100 million lines of genetic code, okay. Not to mention and built at the microscopic level, like I said, which is always never talked about. You try to build one at the microscope. We can't even fathom what the cell is like, and it's getting worse day by day as more and more is learned, not less. DNA is what we would call specified complex information. It is not Shannon information. And I had when I was debating another atheist, when I brought up specified complexity, he brought up David Berlinski. I like David Berlinski, but he's an ID proponent. He's an ID proponent, but he's an agnostic Jew. He doesn't, he's got he's got nothing in this, but so what? He supports ID. I understand that. But they blamed him for, you're just bringing up some kind of how did they put it? Creationist talking point. Well, that's not true. Specified complex information theory. Claude E. Shannon from Bell Labs in 1948. So you can look it up. But DNA is specified complex information. It's a code. It's a software code. It's a self-replicating software code, for God's sake. The supposed creation of life from the goo, as you saw in the video, is absolute nonsense. And so far, I've just talked about one aspect of the list that Lee Cronin put on the screen. The actual math does not lie. And believe me, like I said, it's going to get a whole lot worse in the future shows. And you have to add each one. You can't just, again, simply be able to say maybe, you might say, knock down DNA a little bit lower. That's not the point. All of this stuff has to be added together and added together exponentially. Now, that's the first truth about our supposed ancestor. The supposed first cell, by only a natural means, is not simple. But I've read so many articles, and I do it on purpose. I always read the secular science. As you can see, all the videos I'm giving you are always from secular science as much as I can. They're all from secular science. And I'm telling you, this idea of 6 simple elements is total hogwash and brainwashing. The sheer amount of DNA needed for Cronin's list for abiogenesis by a purely natural means is beyond your comprehension and mine. Beyond it. Way beyond it. So that's why, that's why people like Richard Dawkins, and I'll leave videos in the description below that you can watch it. He muses over, first of all, that aliens, directed panspermia, advanced aliens from another planet, intentionally seeded life on this planet. Or, as I used to bring up, panspermia. And one of the ways that the life could have gotten here is, billions of years ago, an alien spacecraft landed on this planet, and there were microbes that they, left on the planet, even accidentally, right? But anyway, if biological evolution on this planet is such a done deal, and Richard Dawkins has written how many books on evolution, and then he has the gall to admit that it could be by directed panspermia? I think that's funny. Sorry, but I do. Biological on this planet by a purely materialistic means is a fairy tale for grown-ups. And in fact, I've said this before. The very moment Watson and Crick discovered DNA, the moment they discovered it, biological evolution by Darwinian means was put to rest. The problem is, and that was in 1953, but the problem is the scientific community refused to attend the funeral. So maybe, as I said here, we need to have a memorial service, huh? Anyway. But the real point I do want to emphasize in this video is how the materialist evolution basically shot himself in the foot, so to speak. And they're still holding, and again, I used video clips from the past, from past videos I have, but then I used up-to-date videos from Lee Cronin, Origin of Life scientist Lee Cronin, and he's still sticking to the same story. He's saying those facts are not in dispute. Oh, really? Okay. So, also, please keep in mind, again, what have I presented here? Well, I presented only the first piece of the very complex puzzle. Okay? And as I add each piece, the unfathomable complexity of each piece. Anyway, and so to simply imbibe what you imbibe, good luck with that. Anyway, according to mainstream science, spontaneous creation from goo, it still remains. It still remains to this day. But supposedly 3.8 billion years ago, here's the point, with no evolutionary time to do it in, the first supposedly simple cell managed to, quote, poof into existence from Darwin's little goo with 400 million lines, and I'm going to read it because it's important, of a self-replicating computer, storage, retrieval, and error correction biological system, unlike anything we can design today. In fact, Bill Gates says it's the most sophisticated software program in the universe, DNA is. And even with a brain, and it's built at the microscopic level, don't forget. So something that's 1 billion trillion times, and I'm basing that figure just on what we know so far in 2023. But as we continue to delve deeper and deeper, the complexity grows exponentially larger and larger. Who knows, by the time we're done, it'll be 100 billion trillion times more complex than the space shuttle. And again, there was no evolutionary time to do it in. That's hogwash. You have to have evolutionary time to build that much information. I don't understand it because it was very, very easy for me to see that. I don't know why other people don't see it. So now, here's my side. The God of the Bible, Jesus, the creator of heaven and earth, an omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent being, spoke and life poofed into being. You guys have your own poofing story. Now I have my poofing story. Now you got to ask yourself, which poofing story is more logical? Which poofing story is more reasonable? Which poofing story is more probable? I'll tell you what, I'll take Jesus any day of the week, based on the actual scientific, right in front of your face evidence. It's right in front of your face. For ever since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, and without a microscope, they are invisible. His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through his workmanship, all his creation, the wonderful things that he's made, so that they who fail to believe and trust in him are without excuse and without defense. Enough said. Have a blessed day. Bye.